So we left off really on the bottom line of page A. So hopefully we're going to be starting right there with that bottom line of page A, and that will hopefully take us to where we need to go. So let's go. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Elazar said in the name of Rabbi Chanina. Rebbe went ahead and he planted something on Purim. It doesn't really tell us what, but he planted something in the ground on Purim. We're actually on 5 Gemara Daf 5b, Hey Amud Bet, and we just turned from Hey Amud Aleph to the top of Hey Amud Bet, so that's 5b1. The Gemara says, not only did he plant, Rebbe was getting frisky over here. Not only that, did he plant a tree on Purim? Virachatz v'korona shel tzipori. So who said it's back to Corona times? Virachatz v'korona shel tzipori, and he made on the day of the market shel tzipori of the place called Tzipori. B'shiv'ah asar b'Tammuz, on the 70th day of Tammuz, which is a fast day. Bikesh la'akot Shav'av, and he wanted to uproot Shav'av, the fast day. V'lohodu lo. But the Chachamim did not agree to Rebbe's ideas. Rabbi Abba Bar Zavda said in front of him, which is the person that we just read, which was Rabbi Elazar. Rebbe, 1 second. Look, that's not how it went. It wasn't exactly like that. It was a case of Tisha B'Av that fell on Shabbat. So what happened, as we said earlier, we don't make that earlier. We make it late because we don't want to bring punishment forward. It got pushed to Sunday. And Rabbi said, once it was pushed off to Sunday, let it be pushed off completely, and we won't keep it. The Chachamim did not agree to it. They read upon this when this exchange went down, where someone tried to give a scenario from Rabbi Yehuda that the Gemara then said was not exactly recorded, was not repeated back properly. Tovim Shenayim and Ayachad. He quoted the pasuk. That is a little bit tongue in cheek, and rabbis do this very, very well, where they quote pasukim out of context, and it means a lot to the situation that you're in, but that's not exactly what it's referring to. So in Tovim Shenayim and Ayachad, what we really need to say is that whenever there's something that's being dealt with by one person, or something that's being dealt with by two people, two heads are better than one. Tovim Shenayim and Ayachad. Here, what he's saying is not two heads are better than one, but perhaps more accurately prescribed, the second is better than the first. The second iteration of this story, Tovim Shenayim, the second one is better than the first. Alternatively, one could understand it in the context of the pasuk that you have one person who said the story wrong, but because he said the story wrong in the presence of a second person, that second person was then able to reinterpret it according to exactly the way that it was, which means that not only did he retain his knowledge, but everybody else and everyone in the future that would have learned the wrong halakha from the one person benefits from the two. So if that's the case, then the Gemara is basically giving an idea of learning with a chavruta or pilpul haverim, etc., etc. Okay, now the Gemara is going to ask exactly what it was that's going on over here in Rebbe's head. What does it mean Rebbe's planting on Purim? Right? The Rebbe Purim. How can it be that Rebbe planted something on Purim? Rabbi Yosef said, Simcha u'mishkev Yom Tov. The pasuk in Megillah says that this day was set up aside for joy and for parties and for Seudah and for Yom Tov, for literally a day which is Yom Tov. Simcha melamed she'asurim be'esped. When we say Simcha, that tells you that you can't have things which are the opposite of Simcha, which is mourning, and that's therefore we forbid eulogies. Mishteh melamed, we learn from the fact that it says to have a feast on the day. Melamed she'asur b'ta'anit. We learn from that a person is not allowed to fast because it's telling you about having a seudah. So the Yom Tov, what is Yom Tov telling you? It's teaching you that it's asur to do melacha on this day, just like you're not allowed to do melacha on Yom Tov. So if you're not allowed to do melacha on Purim, by the way, just let's bear that in mind for 1 second. The Gemara is telling you, I'm dropping a bomb over here. It's telling you that Yom Tov is asur melacha, therefore Purim you're not allowed to go to work. But not just not allowed to go to work. Rebbe wasn't going to work when he became a gardener, right? Rebbe planted a plant. Does that mean you can't drive a car on Purim? You can't do any of the halachot on Purim because we're learning from here Yom Tov? Fascinating. But at least for this point in the Gemara, Rav Yosef is asking something, and the Gemara is taking it on as simply true that you're not allowed to do any melacha on Purim. Gemara answers, Ella, what must the answer be? Rebbe bar arbe sahaber. Rebbe was a person who lived in a city that was unwalled, so therefore, when does he, what's it called? When does he do this? He does this, so he's on the 14th. When does he do Megillah? He does Megillah on the 14th. And when did he do this action? He planted on the 15th. So therefore, his Purim day was the 14th. The fact that he planted must have been on the 15th, in which case it's not a problem. Now remember the koteret. The headline of the Gemara is Rebbe planted on Purim, and planting on Purim is asur. Answer number one. Rebbe was a 14 fellow, right? Because he lived in an unwalled city, and therefore he planted on the 15th. Gemara says, hold up, and that can't be. Rebbe lived in Tiveria. Nathan Lowe, if you remember, I told you to be patient, and we would come to the Gemara. This is your time. Ella, Rebbe, Eni Rebbe b'Tiveria happened. Rebbe lived in Tiveria. B'Tiveria mukevet choma miyamot Yoshua ben Nun havai. Tiveria had a war from time Yoshua ben Nun. If that's the case, what day does Rebbe celebrate Purim on? The 15th. If that's the case, how can he plant on the 15th? Ella, the Gemara says, obviously, if your head's already Gemara head, you're already sorted. Yeah, fine. So he was a 15 guy, and when did he plant? On the 14th. Ella, Rebbe he was a 15 person, he planted on the 14th. The Gemara says, hold on. Is it so simple to you that Tiveria mukefet choma imot Yoshua ben Nun? How do you know that Rebbe planted that Yoshua ben Nun had at the time of Yoshua ben Nun there was a wall around Tiveria, and Rebbe was planting on the 14th because his mitzvah was the 15th. Is that something that everybody understands? If that's right, does that make sense to you? Sorry, 1 second here. Feel like I've skipped a line.
It's Pshitale the Tiveria Mukefet Choma, right?
Hold on a second. Mi Pshitale Tiveria Mukefet Choma. I think that these sheets came in out of order. Hold on.
90%.
Oh, sorry. Here we go. The picture was just formatted incorrectly. Okay, the Gemara says, does that make? Was it obvious? Chizkiah, he read right the Megillah. We know that he read the Megillah in Tiveria in that city, in Arbesar and Chamesar, both the 14th and the 15th. He himself was unsure whether or not it was surrounded by a wall from the time Yoshua ben Nun. And therefore, that must have been the reason why he read on the 14th and the 15th. If that's the case, our answer that Rebbe lived in Tiveria, was a 15 guy, did his melacha on the 14th, is out the window. Because there should be a safek for Rebbe in his mind if Tiveria is a 14 or 15 place, because we don't know whether or not it had a wall around the time Yoshua. Gemara answers, the Chizkiah was unsure. The Rebbe Pshitale. Rebbe was absolutely sure, and therefore our answer stands. The Gemara asks, and if Rebbe did know that Tiberia was a walled city from the time of Yoshua ben Nun. Mishari would still be allowed to plant. Megillat Ta'anit, it tells us. If you remember, when we learned about Megillat Ta'anit in Masechet Ta'anit, the Gemara told us that there was a book that was an ancient book that they had, which listed all the days that you were not allowed to have a Ta'anit on. They were days of Yom Tov. You were not allowed to do eulogies. So in Megillat Ta'anit, it says, Et Yom Arba Asar, Ve'et Yom Chamisha Asar, Yom Puraya Inun. It lists the 14th and the 15th as the days of Purim. You're not allowed to give a eulogy, and therefore, the Amar Rava, and Rava said, Lo nitzrecha. Why did the Megillat Ta'anit list both? Ela le'esor et shel zeh bazeh, to forbid those on the 14th who keep it on the 14th from doing eulogies on the 15th, and to forbid those that keep it on the 15th from doing eulogies on the 14th, which means that if the Megillat Ta'anit says 14 and 15 and tells us that those are the days of Purim, we already know that. We didn't even need Megillat Ta'anit to list this as a day. That's obvious. In which case, which by the way, if you remember, we encountered in Ta'anit, when the Gemara said something that we found in Megillat Ta'anit, which was so obvious, it must be that it's coming to tell me a law. And we learned laws from the fact that Megillat Ta'anit found it necessary to list things that were obvious. So here too, Rava says that it's coming to tell you that a 14 guy needs to have the 15 restrictions on him, and a 15 guy needs to have the 14th restrictions on him. So therefore, Rebbe would still be prohibited from planting on the other day that he was obligated on. The Gemara says, that's only true with regards to Hesper B'Ta'anit. But when it comes to work is only forbidden on one day. We don't do eulogies, and we don't do fasting on either of those days, but we do melacha, whatever day is yours, that's the day you're forbidden from work, and no more. But we still see that the Gemara is still of the opinion that you're not allowed to work on whatever day Purim is for you. You're not allowed to work. Gemara says, "Any, is that true?" Rav saw a fellow. He was planting kitni, which is flax on Purim, and he cursed him for it. The Lord Samach kitne, and because of that, his flax did not grow. So the Gemara says, okay, obviously, what's your question? The answer to that is, we just got finished saying that you're allowed, a person who is keeping on the 14th is allowed to work on the 15th and vice versa. So you're asking me a question. Rav cursed this guy who planted kotna, he planted kitnia, the flax on the day of Purim. And you see from here that when you plant on the other day, it's forbidden. What are you talking about? The Gemara answers what is obvious. That case was a case where the person was planting on the actual day of his Purim, and therefore it was forbidden. Okay, now we're going to go back to our headline question. Rebbe was planting on Purim. We gave one answer, and that answer so far was that he was in Tiberia, and since Tiberia was an unwalled city from the time of of Yoshua ben Nun, he keeps Purim on the 15th. What day did he plant on? He planted on the 14th. The Gemara says, Rabba Brede Rabba Amar, Rabba, son of Rabba, says differently. Afilu tema biyome. Even if you say that he planted it on the day that he was doing Purim. Why? Hesped, the Gemara says, Hesped eulogies, v'ta'anit kabilu alay. That we accepted on ourselves en masse. So when they said to us that we're declaring these days in the time of Purim already, when we declare these days to be days of mishteh, of feasting, of simcha, of Yom Tov, that's what they declared. But what did the people accept on themselves? Melacha hesped v'ta'anit kabilu alay. Melacha lo kabilu alayu. We did not accept the melacha upon ourselves. So therefore, we never became forbidden in melacha, even on the actual day of Purim, which is, by the way, and I love this as a perfect example. Here we have a story of Rav planting something, and the Gemara is going mashnun about it, coming up with all sorts of answers. But what we're learning actually is the bottom line, present day halacha. Someone told me, Rabbi, I'm so sorry, I was traveling. I'm going to be with you on Purim. My family's not going to be there. Why? Because he had a business. He had some business that he needed to attend to on Purim Day, and he couldn't miss it. So his family is unfortunately not going to make it back, but he's going to make it back. My friends, that question, that statement that he just made to me, is dependent on the first and second answers of this Gemara of how we understand this random story of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda planted. The Gemara answers he planted on the non-Purim day. According to the first answer, I should tell this guy, look, stay in vacation. You're not allowed to work on Purim. According to the second answer, no, you are allowed to work even on the day of Purim. Why? Because they only accepted two things of the decree on themselves at the time, not all three, and therefore, until this day, we are not obligated in that. Now the Gemara is going to bring something which is a grand slam. The Gemara brings a proof from the Pasuk. And a million times you read this in the Megillah and you never noticed it. And now, tomorrow, whatever, 2 days from tomorrow night, you can be able to look at this and know exactly what it's teaching you. In the beginning, it says, they dedicated these days as days of joy, as days of feasting, as days of Yom Tov. And when it says that the Jewish people kept the days, what does it say? La'asot otan, to do them, days of feasting and joy. Yom Tov, but Yom Tov, lo kitiv. It doesn't say it. And that proves that the Jewish people did not keep it. Since we have this proof, one would assume, one would understand that the Gemara is siding with the second opinion with regards to work on the day of Purim. Ve'ela Rav. So if that's the case, we're now left with a question. Ve'ela Rav, my time alatia lahu gavra. Why did Rav then curse this fellow who planted on Purim? Now our answer was that he did it on the day of Purim. But according to the second answer of the Gemara, we now are saying that even on the day of Purim itself, a person is allowed to work because they never accepted it on themselves. So the Gemara answers, this is one of those classic cases where there's something which is mutar from the halakha. But as a group, a certain group accepted on themselves an isur. Once that becomes the case, that they had a minhag to treat it as asur, it becomes asur. Ube'atre de Rebbe lo nahug, and in the place of Rebbe, it wasn't practiced, so therefore Rebbe was allowed to plant it. In the place of Rav, it was practiced in Isur, and therefore Rav cursed this fellow his results that they should not grow because he wanted to ensure that people did not think that it was okay to just decide that they were going to work on Purim once the minhag had become that they were not allowed to work on Purim. I want to give you just an interesting example of this. Machloket Ashkenazim Sfaradim on Pesach about eating kitniot. Kitniot includes beans, it includes rice, all these different things that they don't eat that we eat. Le'alacha, there's no top line halakha forbidding kitniot. At a certain stage, Ashkenazim took on a chumrah of kitniot because they were worried that the beans and the grains which were planted near one another would get mixed up together. And in the harvesting of the beans, there would be grain, and therefore you by mistake be eating hametz on Pesach. So Sephardim never took that on. It's mutar for a Sephardi to eat kitniot. Ashkenazim are forbidden from eating kitniot. They can't say, oh, well, you know what? I don't want to accept this. That's the minhag of their community, and that minhag becomes for them halakha, to the point where Rav is cursing the outcome. He's not cursing the guy, but he's cursing the work, the outcome of the work should not come to fruition. My friends, the flip side of this is fascinating. The Halavi have a stringency that we don't eat on Pesach, even though we eat beans and kitniot. We don't eat hummus and we don't eat tahina. And the reason why we don't eat hummus and tahina is because hummus sounds like chametz, and tahina in Arabic, the word for wheat or for flour is tahin. So therefore, tahina and hummus, which sounded so much like something that we're trying to stay away from, that became something that we decided not to. Now, if you say to yourself, that's ridiculous, Rabbi, we don't even speak Arabic anymore, so I want to have my tahina with my fake lahmajin kosher for Passover mazeh. I don't even know what tahin means. So doesn't apply. The person is not allowed to decide once something is a minhag of the community, they're not allowed to do it. However, and this is very important, however, what happens if the people accepted something on themselves thinking that it was actually asur. And then they found out afterwards that it was a chumrah that they had collectively accepted upon themselves. In that case, they're allowed to undo the minhag. The minhag, when it was done with eyes wide open, I'm not obligated, but we're taking on this minhag, this chumrah, this fence, whatever we're doing. That becomes a binding thing. I'll give you an example. Technically, once there's an edict in the community about, marriages, even though there's no restriction for anybody else, once a person is part of that community, and that is a takana and a minhag that they accepted upon themselves, then the halakha would be that that binds everyone in the community to it. However, what if someone thought it was actually asur from the Torah to do so? In the beginning, not an individual, the community thought that the Ham Yaakov, they thought he was quoting a pasuk. This was forbidden, and the whole community accepted it upon themselves. But they accepted it. It was based on a mistaken assumption. In that case, it would not be binding. But there are many, many things that work like this in terms of the concept of minhagim. Now, I remember when I was learning this the first time. It sounds so. What do you mean? You're just accepting it on yourself, and now it binds you. They accepted it for themselves. What does that have to do with me? If I was alive at the time, I would have said no. Okay, let's say I would have said that I don't want to work on Purim, et cetera, et cetera. Or vice versa, I want to work on Purim. You have to realize that. Let's look back 5 lines of the Gemara before that. The whole reason why we have this isur in the first place in the Gemara and Mishteh and Simcha is because there was this acceptance upon themselves. If Esther and Mordechai had said Simcha Mishteh and Am Yisrael had not accepted it upon themselves, then Purim would not be a day of Simcha and Mishteh. So the whole of Purim is operating based on this, okay? And we're going to see a little bit later how important and why it is that the Chachamim left the ability for this choice in the hands of the people. You want to make a gezerah midrabanan. The Chachamim never said, listen, guys, who show of hands who wants to light Hanukkah candles? Right? It's not a democracy when they make a gezerah. So how come over here they left it to the people? The people chose yes, Simcha and Mishteh. They didn't choose yes to Isur Melacha, and that remains the halakha. It's a strange thing. We don't usually find it. We'll come across a very powerful answer to this in the Gemara to come. Okay?
Rabbi,
You have a question? Yeah.
when we have on Tisha B'Av where it says you don't get if someone goes to work they don't get enjoyment or they don't, it's not bracha. Is that, but it's not a Yom Tov on Tisha B'Av and it's not something like that. So is there a case with fasting and with working on the fast day?
Well, in a certain essence, that's really what Rav was saying. Rav was telling him, you're not allowed to do this, and therefore there should be no siman beracha. However, it also seems clear that the only reason why Rav did it was because he lived in a place where that was the minhag. The minhag was not to work. So in a place where you don't have that, it would be hard to say that Rav's curse, which is really effectively the idea that you don't see siman beracha from that item, should also come to fruition. Okay. Now, in general,
Jonah's question was work benefit on the fast day. There may also be a question of work benefit on the day of Purim.
No, I understand. But I said that when you see that Rav says he cursed the outcome, which is the idea of work benefit, okay? Not Isur work benefit. Practically, you're not going to get that benefit because there's no beracha on the work that you do, okay? So Jonah was bringing a correlation from what we see on Tisha B'Av to really what we see on Purim, that you're really not supposed to work, and therefore Rav said it shouldn't grow. The only thing that I said is that unlike Tisha B'Av, you see that the Gemara only says that Rav said that because it was a place where there was a minhag not to work, illustrating in a place where there was no such minhag, that we would not say this idea of enoro esiman beracha. How much more so that the Gemara's answer is that Rebbe lived in a place which didn't have this minhag, illustrating that Rebbe himself did work on Purim and we're not going to see from there. If he was not going to see from there, Siman Beracha, Rebbe would not have done it. Okay. Now the Gemara comes with a third explanation to the top line question. Rebbe planted on Purim. How did he do so? Answer number one was, right, he planted on the non-Purim day for him. Answer number two was he planted on Purim day, but his area was not an area where there was a minhag not to work, and therefore the idea of working on Purim was only forbidden in a place where they accepted it upon themselves. The Gemara's last response is really, it was the practice, even where Rebbe was, not to work. So the halacha is, like the second opinion, that work is mutar mikaradin. But when they accepted it on themselves in a certain area, that binds everyone from that area. But Rebbe, he planted what's called a planting of joy. And we'll see exactly what this means in the Gemara to come. But the idea is that there's different kinds of planting. You have a planting which is for the purpose of achieving a crop, if you will. But there's another kind of planting which is a neti'ah of simcha, a neti'ah of joy. And what does that mean? And the Gemara now expresses what this neti'ah of joy is by drawing a parallel to another place where we discuss this idea. Where do we find that? The Mishnah says, Avru elu ve'lo na'anu. We learned about this in Masechet Ta'anit. These days, they did the earlier fastings, and the fasting did not achieve the desired results, and the rain did not come. What do? We stop doing work. Bibinyan, in construction, ubinitiyah, and in planting, be'erusin, in engagements, nisuin, and in marriages. V'tana Allah. And on the Braita, on that Mishnah, the Gemara explained, what does it mean that we stop doing binyan? We stop doing binyan shel simcha, the type of binyan of simcha, because over there we're talking about a time of mourning, of fasting, of teshuvah. So we said a person should really stop doing binyan. What kind of binyan? Not a regular construction. The guy can't put up a house. No, it means the type of binyan, which is the binyan of building of simcha, of joy. Nitiyah, what kind of planting is a person not allowed to plant? He's allowed to plant tomatoes. He can't plant plantings of simcha, of joy. So what are these two things that we're now describing? Binyan shel simcha and nitiyah shel simcha. The Gemara answers that refers to that a person whose son gets married, so he builds for his son a new home for him to move into after his wedding. What is a planting of simcha? If someone plants like an interwoven planting of trees to create a beautiful, like a canopy of shade, that's something that only the royals would experience. They eat in that shade. It was something that was it was excessive. It was a luxury, if you will. It wasn't a necessity. So a binyan, which was a house for his son to come back to after the wedding, where you build a chuppah in it, that's something which is the height of joy. And it's also unnecessary. It's a luxury. This planting, which we said was asur, was not planting tomatoes. It was planting something which brings a tremendous amount of joy that the person is living la vida avorniki. Okay? So in those cases, you find the idea of binyan shel simcha. So what does that mean to us? Rebbe was planting a planting of simcha. And therefore, if the reason why on Purim you're not allowed to do simcha, mishteh, yom tov, whatever, we accepted on ourselves not to do the work. Rebbe also lived in a town where you were not, where the minhag was to not do melacha, but the kind of melacha that we said was asur was melacha that was not a melacha of simcha. A melacha of simcha would have been permitted on Purim because that was actually in line with the intention of the day to increase joy. The Gemara continues now. Now we said earlier that when we said that Rebbe lived in Tiberia and that he kept it on the 15th because it was from the time of Yoshua ben Nun, the Gemara says, what do you mean? We had Chizkiah who read on the 14th and the 15th. The Gemara says, Gufa. Let's go back to that. Chizkiah read in Tiberia on the 14th and on the 15th. Misapkele, and the Gemara understood that to mean that he had a safek, he was in doubt. If the wall was existing from the time Yoshua ben Nun or not, and therefore out of doubt, what did he do? He read twice. The Gemara says, "Do you want to tell me that really that was something that he doubted? That Tveria was walled from the time of Yoshua ben Nun?" It's a pasuk. The pasuk already tells us that there were cities that were fortresses, and what are they? It lists four: Tzidim, Tzer, Hamat, and Rakat. And we know the Gemara says the Kaimalan. We hold Rakat, Zu Tveria. That is the city of Tveria. So therefore, since it calls it a city, which is a fortress, it's Aren Mivtzar. Therefore, we know already that that city was Mukef and Choma from the time of Yoshua. So how can it be that Chizkiah read on the 14th and 15th because he was unsure about that? The Gemara answers, let me explain. This is the reason that he was unsure. Mishum dechad gisa, Nathan, here we are, back to you. Mishum dechad gisa, shura diyam havat. On one side, it has a wall that is made of the water, because Tiberia is bridged on one side by the wall of the Kinneret, okay? And therefore, since it protects the city from someone just coming in, you could see them coming from afar on the water, you'd be able to protect yourself against them. The Gemara says, so therefore, he understood that since there's a wall of water on that side, do I call that a walled city or not, even though it might be considered a fortress? Gemara says, if that's the case, why was he not sure? If his question was that on one side there's no wall, it's just water, but water is not a wall. Titania, because it says in the Braita, Asher lo choma. Remember, we brought a proof back then from the pasuk which is describing the redemption of houses that live in a city that is walled or unwalled. And the pasuk over there says Asher lo choma, which has a wall. And the Gemara says that means a wall, below shul igar, and not a wall of houses. Let's say you have houses, townhouses, house. Even though de facto the fourth wall is the back wall or the front wall of these homes, the halakha is it excludes a case of shul igar when there's houses there. Savi, the Gemara says, the next word in the pasuk says that has a wall around it. That excludes Tiberia, where one of its walls is the ocean, is the Kinneret. Therefore, we have a Braita that tells you Asher lo choma, a walled city, is to exclude, those words exclude where one of the walls is a wall of houses. Okay, just a side on this for 1 second. In Har Nof, Sephardim have a trouble if they want to be really strict with the Eruv. If you want to follow the opinion of Harambam, right? They have to follow. They really need the Eruv needs to have a Eruv of walls, a Eruv of string to encompass a city when it has stricter cases inside of it of Rishuyot. Okay, Rambam holds, and many people, therefore, even in a decent Eruv for Ashkenazim, Sephardim are more strict on the halachot of Eruv that they need a wall. Chamovadia said, in the city of Har Nof, in the inside of the city, you're allowed to carry. Why? Because you have surrounding of a wall. There is no wall around Har Nof, but the houses are built so close together, and Har Nof is really a big circle, so the outermost houses all around the perimeter of the circle create a wall, and then they're able to bridge the gaps between the walls with Eruv string, so the majority of it is wall. So that is exactly the scenario that the pasuk is coming to say you can't use when it comes to a walled city for the sake of redeeming a house in the walled city versus a house in an unwalled city. So Asher lo choma excludes shur igar, a wall of houses. Saviv excludes where it's not completely enclosed, like Tiberia. So you see clearly, if that was what Chizkiah was doubting, the Gemara says we could learn from that scenario of a walled city with regards to redemption, that in a case of Tiberia specifically, which is what the Mishnah teaches us, that's not considered having a wall. The Gemara says, "Le'inyan bate'arei choma lo misapkale." You're right. Chizkiah has no doubt that with regards to a city being walled vis-a-vis redemption, that this doesn't count. Because there, it says specifically a pasuk to exclude it. Hika misapkale, when he did have doubt, is le'inyan mikra megillah, with regard to the laws of megillah reading. Therefore, he does not know if you should port over the laws that we learn from a house, from a city, a walled city versus an unwalled city, versus vis-a-vis redemption is to be learned to Megillah. Now, some of you will remember we had a machloket earlier on that we brought down a halakha that says that if you have a city that they built the homes and then they built the wall, or they built the wall and then they built the homes, is it considered a walled city or not? And the Gemara over there brought up a proof from the pasuk, Asher lo choma. And we said back then that there's a machloket if that opinion, that Gemara was talking only about redeeming houses, or also with regards to the laws of reading Megillah. And that was a machloket amongst the Rishonim, how to read that Gemara. This line in the Gemara is the source of that machloket Rishonim. Because you see over here that the Gemara says that Chizkiah himself had this doubt, and he was unsure whether or not to apply that law from houses in a walled city regarding redemption to the law of Megillah reading, and I think what the other opinion of the Rishonim says, one opinion is looking at this and saying, you see over here that there's a possibility of differentiating between redemption and Megillah reading, and therefore you have no proof that a city that built its wall after it built its homes is not considered a walled city with regards to Megillah, only with regard. Why? Because you see over here the Gemara differentiates between them. So therefore, also over there's a differentiation between them. However, there's another way of looking at that, and I think that that's important. So let's just finish this Gemara, and then I'll share the other way of looking at it, and then I think we'll draw it to a close for today. The Gemara says, what is his doubt? What is he unsure about? My perazim umay mukafim. What does it mean unwalled, and what does it mean mukaf, that it's surrounded? Dichtiv gabe mikra megillah. What is the intention? Right? Mishum dahani miglu. Did the Gemara mean to distinguish that it's exposed? In which case, dahani nami miglaya, Tiberia is also exposed. Why? Because on one side there's no wall. But Dilma mishum dahani mignu, or maybe it's because that those are protected. Dahani lo miklu. Hanami migna, and Tiberia is protected, even though it doesn't have four walls. It has protection on that fourth side. If you remember, back then when we were learning this, one of the reasons why we distinguished between Megillah reading in one place and another is because the chashivut of a walled city. And we expressed that idea sometimes rested on the shoulders of the idea that this is an important place, and that's why they were protecting it. So if that's the idea of protection, then protection doesn't need only walls. Imagine, as an example, you had a city that was on a cliff. And on three walls, three sides of the city, you could come up the mountainside and ascend to the city. So they build three walls on the other side. On the other side is a sheer cliff that drops, 2,000 feet. It would be silly to put up a wall there. No one is coming up that cliff. It's impossible. And therefore, that city would be considered protected. So the Gemara is expressing that Chizkiah had this question in his mind, if it's miglaya or not miglaya, if it's migni or not migni, and what's the point that gives us this halakha? What is the point that gives us this halakha with regards to it? Now we're going to continue along these lines in the next Gemara when we continue next time, Bezat Hashem. The only thing I want to add is that, remember, the Gemara said earlier that Chizkiah was unsure, but it said that Rebbe was sure. So maybe the machloket Rishonim is actually, who do we follow? Do we follow Chizkiah that differentiates between houses and walled cities for Megillah and houses and walled cities for redemption? Or do we hold like Rebbe, who understood that there was a difference, and Rebbe was sure enough to be able to rule on that, and that those opinions of the Rishonim therefore drew their conclusions here and as well over there with regards to when they built the wall after they built the city. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen.